My name is Paul Bashir. I am the co-founder and director of Anonymous for the Voiceless. I only have 30 minutes with you today, so I'm going to give you a very express and summarized version of the training and the ethos of AV. And I'm going to talk about some things that should help you to feel more confident with speaking with non-vegans. So, first of all, AV is predicated on a basic idea that people who are not vegan should be slapped in the face with the reality of what they're responsible for. We stand on streets all around the world. We've done this in 1,011 cities officially. And we show people the truth of what happens when animals are exploited, mainly for their flesh or from whatever comes from their bodies for human use. And then based on the context of showing people that reality, which I think people deserve to see and should see, we have an engagement with them through an outreach interaction. And through that interaction, the point of that interaction is not to simply educate them. This is a misunderstanding that some people have about the work we do. Education and information is important, but it's only a small part of what we're trying to achieve. The goal is to get them to go vegan. And not only to become vegan, but to speak out against this injustice, to become an animal rights activist. And not only that, but to become the best animal rights activist in the world. Now, if that's the level that we're aiming for, then the way that we do this needs to be taken into consideration. We need to understand that to be most effective at achieving that goal, it's not just about giving people information, because information is already out there. We live in the age of information. People already have access to this information. We have lots of information out there already. But why aren't people vegan in mass? Because they choose to look away, they choose to ignore, and they choose to be complacent. And we live in a society where that is comforted, isn't it? Everybody in society is going to make you feel A-okay with being non-vegan. In fact, vegans are mocked. The idea of being vegan is mocked and ridiculed. So we live in a society where you don't really have a motive in society to be vegan. So the information's already out there. What's keeping people from being vegan? Well, we don't live in a society where you're held accountable for not being vegan, right? That's what's missing, not the information. And if you're not holding non-vegans accountable, I hope that this talk will help you to understand the moral imperative that you have as a vegan to do that with non-vegans. And that's the other thing. For those of you who are not active, what are you doing? We need you to be active because the animals are only relying upon vegans. They have no one else. It's a great thing that you no longer participate in what the rest of society participates in. But from there on, if you understand the purpose of veganism, then you need to be active. I cannot stress that enough. Now, in order to understand why I'm making such a strong point about this, I need to go all the way back to the definition of veganism. Please raise your hand if you know who Leslie Cross is. Wow, hardly any of you. Here in this country in 1951, he coined the term. The term simply means to be a human being who rejects animal exploitation. That's it. So when you ask most people, what does vegan mean for you? They'll say, It means you don't eat meat, and you don't eat dairy, and you don't eat eggs, and things like that. They think it's about what you don't consume. They think it's a diet, and a restrictive one at that. And so we are in a serious problem as a movement if that's what the global consensus is on what this word means. And this problem is not just with non-vegans. This problem exists within the vegan movement. Most of you, like I said, didn't even know who Leslie Cross was. Now, the term was changed by Vegan Society, and I'm not going to get into why, because I don't really know the full story. But the term was changed, and I'm assuming that it was in an effort to clarify the term further. But I think that the term is already clear. I think that the way that it was defined is already crystal clear. Now, if you take a stance as a human being to reject animal exploitation, and you don't speak out against this injustice, and you're not active for the animals, you don't understand the definition of the word. Because if you reject any other injustice, would you just stop doing it yourself? Or would you speak out against it when everybody in society around you is doing it 3 times a day or more? You would speak out against it, wouldn't you? Right? Let me hear your voices. You would, wouldn't you? So why would you compromise when it comes to non-human animals who are the most victimized in society, the most oppressed? They have been oppressed longer than any group of beings. And they are oppressed by the trillion every year by only 8 billion humans. This is the largest injustice by far. There is no greater injustice than this. People love to say, why don't you speak about human rights? This isn't relevant. Really? The opposite is true. There is nothing more relevant than this. The animals have been oppressed to such a degree that they're not even considered victims at all. And who is going to change that in society? The only ones that the animals can rely on are vegans to defend them. So I hope I've made my point clear about why you should be active for the animals. And within the organization that I run, you are more than welcome to join us as long as you understand that what we are doing is taking a stance against animal exploitation in society, and that we take that job seriously. If you don't have a local chapter near you, you can become an organizer and you can operate Cubes of Truth. Raise your hand if you know what a Cube of Truth is. Fantastic.
Come on, just do it.
Cubes of Truth are extremely effective at getting people to change. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about exactly what our flow is. That's what you see behind me. This is the flowchart that we recommend you use when you speak to non-vegans. But before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ethos that we have at AV. I'll talk to you about the definition of the word, because that is extremely important for you to understand first and foremost, because it will dictate how you operate, how you communicate as an activist. And now I want to talk to you about the approach that we have with our outreach principles and why we have them. This approach that we have is pure honesty. I come from a sales background and I understand how to say things in a sweet way to convince people to sign on the dotted line. But this is not that. This is addressing an injustice. See, I had a big ego and I thought I could bring those things into doing animal rights activism, but it doesn't apply. Because again, this is about holding people accountable, and that's a different ballgame completely. So there are no political games and sales games that you can play that will get people to change. And to make my point clearer, it doesn't matter how perfect you say everything that you need to say if you say it to the wrong person. People are either willing to change or they are not. And to make that point even clearer, Earthling Ed's parents are not vegan. Gary Yourofsky's mother is not vegan. My parents are not vegan. My family members are not vegan. They have heard me speak about this injustice ad nauseum I have done outreach to them for years, and they still have not changed. I've done outreach interactions on the streets with people who seemed like they would change, and I said everything perfectly, and they still didn't change. So this is a numbers game. The more people that you speak to, the higher the probability will be that you will speak to people who will change. And that is part of your job as an activist, to assess who you're speaking to, whether they're reachable or not, and understanding that you will not reach people who are not reachable. This should help you to not waste your energy on people who are not reachable, because you will end up just banging your head up against the wall with those kinds of people, and you will drain yourself as an activist. And I've seen burnout in this movement so much that I have to stress this point to all of you, because it's helped me in my activism and countless other activists who listen to what I have to say. So please don't waste time with people who are not reachable, and focus your energy on people who will act, who will change. And that's that. That's how this ball game goes. I want to now get into the flowchart that we have, because a lot of people ask me exactly how to do this and to not get too angry, because if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, right? So of course we should feel angry. But the way that you channel your anger into activism is exactly how you feel fulfilled at the end of the day. So the more effective your activism is, the more fulfilled you will feel. And that's the only way to transmute that anger. Otherwise, you will just sit with that anger and it will rot you alive inside. So that's another reason why you need to be active for the animals. So what I'm teaching you right now is not a script, okay? What I'm going to get into behind me is not a script. Everything that I'm covering here is based on principles. And as long as you understand that, it's not so much about saying things exactly as I'm telling you to say them here. It's about understanding why you're saying them, and saying them however you want to say them, but saying the same thing in order to provoke a certain response out of people. Okay, so obviously this is based on being at a cube of truth, and you can apply this into your interactions in general. So if at the beginning, if I'm talking about seeing the footage and I'm making points about pointing at the footage and things like that, just imagine that you don't need to actually have the footage in front of you, although it is helpful. You can actually apply these principles in social interactions. In fact, I just went to Taiwan and did an action called 15 Days in Taipei, which was 15 days consecutively of doing cubes of truth in Taipei. And then during that action, I did my first lecture in front of a classroom. And I've been looking forward to doing that kind of activism, but I wanted to test to see if it would work for me to simply follow these principles in a classroom lecture. And I convinced 23 out of 33 students to declare that they would be vegan as of that day, and also speak out against this injustice. Okay, so somebody stops at a cube of truth. We don't chase after anybody, because we only want people that are open-minded and willing to change. So somebody stops at a cube of truth and we say, have you seen this kind of footage? Okay, this is a good test question to see what their openness is exactly to this. And if people are confused about what's going on, we can explain it to them by saying we're showing behind the scenes of industries that exploit animals. And namely, we're showing the meat, dairy, and egg industries. The important question to ask from the beginning is, how do you feel about animal exploitation? And the reason why we start with feeling is because most people's brains are conditioned by the society that we live in, right? And that's why it's awesome to outreach kids, by the way, because they're not so conditioned. But when you tell people the truth, they recognize the truth. The truth is familiar. Have you ever heard the expression real recognize real? Yeah? This is an urban saying, and there's a lot of truth in that. Because when you tell people the truth, they recognize and respect exactly what it is, the truth. And that's why when you are telling people the truth, it is not going to invoke the kind of response that a lot of people think. A lot of people think that being as confronting as I'm telling you to be is going to invoke people who want to be violent with you and fight you and things like that. And while that may happen rarely, it is not the common response that you get from people. Because again, they respect the fact that you are telling them the truth. Telling people what they need to hear versus what they want to hear is the biggest form of love that you can show someone and respect. And that's another thing. And people confuse being loving in your approach with just saying what they want to hear and pandering and things like that. But if you tell them what they need to hear, you will actually invoke the response that you're looking for, which is to earn respect. And earn is a key word there, because you actually have to do something in order to get respect from somebody. And that means you're willing to do the thing that's difficult. If someone is open-minded, they will, based on their response, they will show you by saying something like, yes, I've seen this kind of thing and it's terrible. Or they'll say, no, I've never seen this kind of thing before. And if they're a troll or they're closed-minded, they'll say something like, yeah, I've seen this kind of stuff before, whatever. Or, yeah, this makes me hungry, yum. Now, in the case of a troll, you can just say the same question, really, is this how you feel about animal exploitation? Are you sure? And if they continue on with their charade, this is a good sign for you to not waste time with that person. Thank you for not wasting any more of my time. Move on. And if they are someone who just doesn't care, same thing, move on. We can't change people who don't care. And if they are open-minded, then you can ask them, are you against animal exploitation? And most people, by far, will say yes. Because how crazy would it be to say, no, I'm actually for it? Even hunters will tell you that they're against animal abuse. Isn't that crazy? So most people will actually not only just say that they are against animal exploitation, they will say, of course I'm against it. 100%. How crazy of you to even ask that question. That's usually the response that you will get when you ask that question to them. The next question is where we get into the core of the intention of the interaction, which is to hold them accountable and to tell them the truth. Do you think it's possible to be truly against animal exploitation if you consume animal products such as meat, dairy, and eggs? If you are demanding this while pointing at the screens. Now, this is where people will either get into their excuses and they'll say, well, I do think it's possible because there's a better way to do this. We can do this humanely. Or, yeah, I think it is possible as long as you have like a chicken in your backyard and blah, blah, blah. The humane myth, right? Or, no, it's not possible because there's a contradiction there. If you consume animal products, you're not really against it. Now, if they say the latter, that means you're talking to someone who's honest and open-minded and usually more willing to change than people who give excuses. But it's not to say that if they give excuses that they won't change, because sometimes people give excuses from a genuine place. They're just throwing things at you to see if it sticks. Not in a way to be shitty with you. They just want to test the waters to see what's true and what's not. Now, the next question is, do you feel that anything is preventing you from being vegan? And an alternative to that question is, well, why aren't you vegan now? And this is where you'll get any of the residual excuses, any of the leftover excuses that there could possibly be in that person's mind should come out then. And it's important that you get all of the excuses out of them so that you can address them. And there's nothing left unturned, right? So usually people say things like lions do it too. Plants have feelings also. But we've been doing this for thousands of years. My religion says it's okay. Whatever the argument against being vegan is, it doesn't actually matter how perfect your response is, even though it is good to know how to respond to these things. The best way to respond to any argument is to simply say, if you were in the animal's position and you were the one being exploited to death, would the argument that you just used to justify it be acceptable? And usually if they're open-minded, they will understand how ridiculous it is to say what they've just said. So in the case of saying, well, religion says it's okay, like we use methods such as halal or kosher. Well, what if I was to practice that method on you right now? Would you find that acceptable? The whole point of understanding how wrong it is to put the person that you're speaking with in the victim's position. And if you're not doing that, why would you expect them to understand how serious the injustice is? When it comes to any other injustice, we always analyze it from the victim's position, don't we? We don't understand how bad it is from the victimizer's point of view in any case. So why would we do it here? Why would we play the intellectual game so much of saying, well, would you do this to a dog? And that's the other thing, by the way. There's a lot of dog comparisons going on in the vegan movement too. And I understand the purpose of this. The purpose is to get people to respect cows and chickens and pigs and turkeys and fish just as much as they respect dogs. But why do we think we live in a society of dog lovers exactly? We still have shelters that operate and they kill dogs by the thousand. We still have dog breeders in our society and they breed dogs by the thousand. And dogs are not given the actual respect that you would hope. In some countries, people eat dogs. And I know that you're using this activism in countries where that's not the case. But if we want cows and pigs and chickens and fish and turkeys to be respected on the same level as dogs, we're not actually achieving animal liberation. The only way that people are going to understand exactly what needs to happen is if they imagine themselves in the victim's position. And of course, people can only understand how serious it is from that perspective, because the whole concept of individuality comes from your own individuality, right? You can only understand what an individual is and how much a victim must suffer because you imagine it from your own perspective as an individual yourself. So that's why it's extremely important to not only put the person you're speaking with in the victim's position, but to also speak as if you are in the victim's position. How would you like to be represented? Another thing at AV that we have stopped doing since 2018 is conflating the vegan message with environmental talking points and health talking points. Now, the reason why we did that is because human health is another way of saying human rights. It is your right to pursue well-being. And by the way, I am a big fan of that right. I love the fact that I get to control my health with the choices I make and to be a healthy human being. But being healthy has nothing to do with animal rights. This is about the animals, not about you. And when it comes to environmental talking points, a lot of people love to tell me that the animals live in the environment. Yeah, but humans also live in the environment. And most people that are doing vegan activism that talk about the environmental talking points are not talking about wild animals that are suffering in the environment, such as gorillas and giraffes and elephants. They're talking about soil and trees and air and water. So if you are going to talk about environmental talking points as an animal rights activist, then please focus on the wild animals that are being impacted by the exploitation of non-human animals at the hands of humans. Because that is what makes sense as an animal rights activist, and that is a clear message that you are getting across to non-vegans about what this is all about. Most people, when you ask them what is preventing them from being vegan, usually the response is actually pretty pathetic. They'll say things like, it's really hard to be vegan, it's inconvenient, it costs too much to be vegan. And again, if you put them in the victim's position and say, well, if someone had to pay an extra $1, an extra £1 in order to not exploit you to death, wouldn't you want that to be the case? And by the way, vegan food is not actually more expensive. It depends on what you choose. If you're at a grocery store and you choose to eat blueberries over bananas, of course you're going to pay more. Oh, and by the way, if you are only addressing arguments and it's going around in circles, we call that the circle of excuses, then we give them 3 chances. So if you address one argument and they're not satisfied and they just want to move on to the next argument without even acknowledging that what they've said is invalid, then you address the second argument and they're still not satisfied, and then you address the third argument and they're still not satisfied, and they just move on to the 4th and the 5th and the 6th. What makes you think you're going to get anywhere by playing the debate game? After 3 excuses, we have a 3 strikes and you're out policy. You should move on. Just move on. Stop wasting your time with those people. But if you have addressed their arguments successfully, then the next question is, do you know what the #1 benefit of being vegan is? And most people have their ears perked because they love to know what the benefit is for them. And they'll say, well, I guess it's better for your health, or it's better for the environment, which, by the way, most people say. And that proves that we don't need to be educating most people on the environmental talking points or the health talking points. And the answer that some people will give you is, well, it's better for the animals, which is a great response. They're understanding the point of the interaction that you're having with them if they say that. The way that you respond to that is by explaining the following. For the animals, they won't be exploited by you anymore. You won't be the reason that this, while pointing at the screen, is happening anymore. And for you, when you say that you're against animal exploitation, you're against animal abuse, you will no longer be a hypocrite. You will be telling the truth with your actions, which is what defines you as an individual. Your character is not defined by your words. And you can ask them, do you agree with that statement? And most people by far will tell you that they fully agree with what you said. Again, because you are telling them the truth. And you are not beating around the bush with political games and sales games, which do not work. The next question is, if you were in the animal's position, how fast would you want this to end? Most people rationally will say, of course, now. And this is an important question to ask leading up to the last question, because they need to understand the moral emergency that this is. And the last question is, then what are you going to do after this conversation? Are you going to stop exploiting animals and become vegan? And most people will say, I'll try, I'll reduce, I'll think about it. Okay, now if you were the one in the animal's position here, would you accept that kind of response? Would you want me to reduce how much I exploit you? Would you want me to abuse you less? Would you want me to just think about it and maybe eventually stop enslaving you and using you as a resource? No, of course not. But you do get a lot of people that say, yes, I need to start right now and I'm going to become vegan. Because you have done something that nobody in their entire lives will ever do, which is to hold them accountable. And just remember, You may be the only person they ever speak with who understands the importance of doing that and actually does it. For the rest of their lives, they will be comforted by people around them to continue exploiting animals to death, and it's all fun and games when it's a Sunday roast. But when they speak to a real deal vegan activist who tells them the truth, for the first time in their lives probably, they'll understand how guilty they should feel. And the goal isn't to necessarily make them feel guilty, but of course people should feel guilty, because what other emotion is the correct emotion that you should feel when you're responsible for the largest injustice on earth? And this is why a lot of vegans who do activism shy away from saying what needs to be said, because it doesn't feel good to make people feel guilty. But if you're not doing that and you're avoiding that, then what makes you think that they're going to change? And at the end, we leave them with a little quote. Remember, this is not food for thought. This is an injustice, and it's an urgent matter. And for as long as you take to go vegan, these animals will be exploited to death because of you. Once you have gone vegan, please also use your voice to speak out against this. And that's it. It's a really short and sweet flowchart that we have. You can complete this within 3 minutes with somebody. Or for those who want to ask more questions or are a bit more difficult to deal with, it might take 10 minutes or more. To summarize this, people ask, but how do you know if you're actually being successful here? And my response is simple: we don't. But in order to be honest about the work that we're doing, we can only focus on what we can control. And there are only 4 things that we can control. And in order for you to stay sane and to keep your mind fresh and to have the motivation to continue doing this, the 4 things that you can control and that you should work on mastering is: what are you saying? How are you saying it? Who are you saying it to? Are you talking to people who aren't reachable? Or are you talking to people who are open-minded? And how long are you saying it? Because if you say this for too long to people, you're making it seem like this is a really complex topic, and it's not. It's really simple, isn't it? So make it sound as simple as it actually is. I'm not exaggerating by saying that this is simple. You should be communicating it as simple as it actually is, so that people feel that they can adopt this immediately and they change immediately, which is the goal. Not to change tomorrow or the next day or at some point in the future, to change immediately. This is a call for action. This is not just food for thought. What are you going to do about this right now? Okay? That's as serious as it is. Do we have time for Q&A? Can we do one question? And then for the other questions, we have an anonymous for the Voiceless stall. Okay, it's near the tattoo booth. And you can come and ask me questions over there, or I might hang around outside as well if you want to ask me some questions. But I'll take one question. Who's the lucky question asker? I saw this guy first. I'm going to go with you. Go ahead.
So I am a vegetarian, sorry. But I hear what you said. So my question is, because I live with a vegan, why don't you focus more on the environmental issues? I know we're focusing on animal welfare, but there's a climate emergency.
Yep.
And that's right front and center. So I don't know how you do these cube sessions, but I think that's one way to get people involved.
I don't focus on it because I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not an environmental activist, more accurately. Okay? And by the way, I respect the environmentalist movement profoundly. So I'm not here to discredit the movement. I'm here to say that we are vegans and we are vegan activists. And the whole point of a vegan activist is to reject animal exploitation. Wow, thank you. and go vegan. And just quickly, before I wrap this up, I'm going to do a little video here. How about you all say, go vegan and join the cube. Ready? Go. That's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll be outside for questions, and come to the Anonymous for the Voiceless booth. People ask us how you can support AV. Come to the Anonymous for the Voiceless store, buy a t-shirt, and support a campaign we're doing in Amsterdam. One damn month, 31 days straight, 9 hours per day for the whole month of August in Dam Square, Amsterdam. I'll see you outside.